Today we welcome our very special guest speaker, Amy Peck, to the Holoship for this episode of the Future Humans 3.0 vodcast show. Amy Peck is a business development and strategy executive. She is the founder and CEO of EndeavorVR, which is a VR, AR, MR, XR strategy and consulting company for symbiotic frontier technologies. She works with enterprise, commercial, and educational institutions on leveraging these technologies at scale and providing end-to-end strategies for the most effective path to success. Amy is also an advisory board member for the SXSW Accelerator and was also previously the Senior Director of Enterprise Content at HTC Vive. Welcome, Amy. How are you? Welcome to the Holoship.
I am very, very well. How are you?
I am good. So first of all, I just want to say I am super inspired by your work. You're a thought leader in the technology space. How did you get into all of this? Like, what inspired you to be a thought leader in tech? Was it growing up with your passion for science fiction, or was it something else?
You know, I've definitely always been a geek, but I was more of like a MacGyver than like a tech person, but I was always intrigued by like how things worked. And I was always the one who could like rewire the stereo and like I would fix everything. But I think later in life, and it's funny, in VR, we always talk about how everyone always remembers their first time.
Yeah.
And, my first time I was working at Leap Motion.
Yes.
And Leap Motion was this sort of tiny, like iPhone looking peripheral that just plugged in by a USB to your laptop, and then you could control objects on your screen using just your hands.
Wow.
And it was sort of coincided with the launch of the very first DK1, the Oculus Developer Kit, and the developers. And I was sort of sitting among all of the developers, I think they were horrified because I just moved from New York, but I needed to understand like what the tech did. So I was right in the middle of them, and they actually just duct taped a Leap Motion to the first DK1. And then we were working with this development group, this game studio called Chaotic Moon, and they built an application called Shark Punch, which is exactly as it sounds. You would just, you'd go into the headset, and then because the Magic Leap was on the front, it would track your hands and you would punch shark. Actually, in real life is what you're supposed to do, by the way. So if you're ever in the ocean and a shark comes at you, you're supposed to punch them in the nose, fully prepared to be attacked in shark-infested waters. But the reason I was brought on to Magic Leap, to Leap Motion was originally, they were wanting to be a consumer peripheral, but I was brought in by the VCs to really explore what the technology could do for enterprise. Mm-hmm. When I saw it combined with virtual reality, I just thought like, this is it. Like, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to stop doing everything else. And so I became obsessed with immersive technology and the different applications, and just kind of making our lives better.
I love that. That's so inspiring. And you've got your own company, EndeavorVR. Do you want to speak a bit more about EndeavorVR?
Yeah, I literally like started it on my dining room table. I saw that, I really saw that there was a need, but this was back in 2013 was when I kind of started exploring what the applications might be for enterprise. But it was 2015 when I started my company. And I got lucky because I'd already been talking to a number of different companies, and it wasn't an area that Leap Motion at the time wanted to explore. So I was able to start my company with a fairly soft landing and started working with clients right away. And I have to say I've been incredibly fortunate in my career.
I love how you emphasize projecting a Protopian future and being prepared for the future. That's just so beautiful. And you go through all the different kinds of realities. Of course, virtual reality is just one of many, and there's so many different names in the tech world. It can sometimes get a little bit confusing. We've got XR, MR, AR. Do you want to speak on each of those realities to explain it and their different impacts on the world?
Yeah, I think I look at it as kind of a spectrum. On the one end you have augmented reality, which is really just an overlay. Mm-hmm. And there's kind of within that, there's mobile AR. So you're sort of holding up your phone and you're accessing, these kind of digital assets from your phone. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have virtual reality, right? Where you're in a headset and you're fully immersed and it's a completely controlled environment.
Love it.
And then in the middle, it's sort of mixed reality or extended reality. There's all kinds of different kind of names for it, but to me, that's where you're sort of seamlessly integrating, the physical world with the digital world. I've actually heard a few people call it phygital, and I really hope that doesn't stick because it sounds terrible. but that's really what it is. It's sort of, it's a digital overlay that can be interactive or has some kind of context to the real world, whereas AR is just information overlaid that doesn't have relevance to where you happen to be. And that's where I think it starts to get really interesting. And I do see a point at which we're not really going to be concerned about, what reality we're in. It's going to be very seamless. We'll just move in and out of different realities. We'll be accessing different types of digital data. And, if we can get out of the hype cycle of the metaverse, I also look at this as the, kind of the gateway drug into the metaverse. And I don't think the metaverse is just a virtual environment. I think the metaverse is about exactly what we talked about in sort of that mixed reality realm, where it is just a seamless integration of the physical and digital. And it's just a matter of scale, whether you're in a fully immersive environment or you're in an environment where there's just access to a digital overlay.
I love that. And that makes me think of, how we're progressing to what we'd kind of call Web3 and like the internet of everything. So it's like, as you said, that stack of technologies all coalescing together. So for people that are watching and listening, how would you describe like Web3 in a more high level explanation and, spatialization?
Well, I like to use the example that, if you could open up your laptop and you could just walk into it.
Oh,
and
awesome.
kind of experience, everything that you're watching on your screen all around you, or access any kind of data, or, instead of sort of sending a text, you can use your voice, you can call up the text, you can see a visual representation of the text just naturally in your field of view, and then sort of send it off. And we're moving towards that. There are a lot of tools for example, creating WebXR and A-Frame, which again is just another step towards getting the consumers familiar with, kind of interacting with 3D objects. And so the irony is that we live in a 3D world, and yet we access all of our data, including a lot of 3D assets, on a 2D screen. And so, if you imagine the world is our canvas, or the world is our screen, and digital assets can integrate with them in any way, shape, or form. I think it starts to get really, really interesting.
Yeah, and for sure. And with like any like new tech, you have the adoption cycle, like the early adopters and then the laggards. So to live in that world of Web3, where it's like we're stepping into that computer, from a timeline perspective, where do you see this heading in a time frame?
I think the interesting thing is that the technology is at, it's certainly not fully baked, but a lot of the foundational elements are there. In fact, I just spoke to one of our clients today who just installed, a private 5G network in their innovation space. And they measured like these blazing fast speeds, on their, virtual other VR headsets and their MR headsets. And, so there is technology to support this sort of evolution into like an AR cloud or mixed reality. But I think it's really it's going to come from games, and it's going to come from creative social media. And when I say creative social media, if you look you look at applications like Snap and especially TikTok, they are, yes, social media platforms, but they are really also toolkits for, kind of telling stories or for creators. And I think out of that, there's this whole generation of creators emerging who are building this next evolution of really interesting, it started with face filters, but now, you can start to, you can have holograms sitting on your desk. Like, it's sort of these baby step moments, but especially anything that's mobile or web-based right now and is accessible. In fact, just this morning, Eighth Wall and 8i did what we think is the very first live web-based live stream of holograms.
I saw that
from the 8i studios.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it starts to get really interesting. And then if you look at some of the trends in Fortnite, for example, where you have Travis Scott, or you have The Weeknd in TikTok, and it's just kind of that blending of games and social media and entertainment that is going to start pushing the sort of providers, right? So it's not just going to be the usual suspects of Facebook. Is interesting that ByteDance, which is TikTok's parent company, acquired Pico. So it'd be interesting to see whether there's an evolution with TikTok, or it's something that ByteDance is doing separately. But I think as we start to advance the technology and the capabilities and put it in the hands of creators, then you're going to start to see it really, really accelerate. So while I don't have a specific timeline, I do think we're on an uptick of general interest and adoption, but it's still going to be a slow road. Like, we're not going to really be living in the metaverse in the broadest terms, for probably a decade.
Right. Well, thank you so much for explaining that. And of course, as you said, technologies such as 5G are enabling this, new level of technology adoption and inspiring, I guess, the creator economy as well. And that kind of leads me to something that I'm very interested about, which is identity and in the metaverse, or with these technologies, the technologies can unlock new forms of identity. For example, here I'm standing in a Rococo motion capture suit, taking on an identity of a superhero avatar. So what are your thoughts about these technologies, the different realities, 5G, with the concept of identity, and maybe how that can feed into this positive creator economy?
God, there's so much good that can come out of not only these kind of alternate identities that we can have in virtual environments, but also around self-sovereign identity, and actually, kind of leveraging our avatars as our digital representative, and then leverage that to actually, kind of hold and manage our own data. And, it's interesting, all of this talk around the metaverse, and brands and companies are kind of rushing in to create their own metaverse, and they're all like, oh, we've got to create NFTs. And to me, that's so 1.0, and it doesn't scratch the surface of what the opportunity is, which is really for brands to have a completely open and transparent relationship with, one-to-one with their customers. And there can be an open exchange of data. So in other words, a brand could request certain data points from one of their customers and then offer some sort of value in between, whether it's you get to, get, advanced purchase opportunities, or you get to help, design the next generation of, whatever the new collections are going to be.
Love that.
And so I would urge brands to not steam in, but to be really thoughtful about how they want to interact with consumers, because it's not just about generating revenue. That will come. The brands who really take, a smart and measured approach at providing real value, whether it's in the digital landscape or the real landscape.
Yes.
Those are the ones that I think are going to win in the metaverse, and just, carving out and throwing some NFTs out there. It falls short of what the opportunity is, in my mind.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. There's a big difference between entering the NFT space purely for a cash grab versus thinking long term as a brand, like you were saying, and what value you're going to give to the community, and how can they be involved and maybe co-create with you and build together. And then that other point that you said about data, so in Web 2, of course, with centralized, you don't know what they're doing with your data, but we know what they're doing with their data. They're using it against us and selling it to the highest bidder. I mean, we've seen all the Netflix documentaries about it, and so I guess that's what the excitement is as well surrounding Web3. It provides that excitement and hope for, like you said, self-sovereign identity and that choice for how you want to share your data. But then above that, the next tier is being involved with the brand, the artist, the company, and having a mutual exchange of value. So I too agree with you, and I'm very excited to see where this space will go, especially over the next decade.
Yeah, no, likewise. We're very much aligned there. And
Yes.
You did mention, which I wish I had coined the term, but I didn't, this sort of protopian vision.
Yeah.
And the reason, that term came about is that, I fundamentally, and I gather you as well, I just fundamentally don't believe in a dystopian future, because we're in control of what our belief system is today, one. But two, a utopian vision seems kind of Pollyanna-ish and unrealistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
We recognize that there are huge challenges that we're faced with.
Yeah.
But protopian just means that you kind of wake up every day and, your focus isn't on, everything that's wrong. Your focus is, like, how can we do things just a little bit better? And that can be on a very personal level, or it can be, kind of a part of a bigger vision of like, how do we improve the human experience? But it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be a big event for anyone, and it doesn't have to be a heavy lift for people.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just changing mindset. And if we all start to change mindset and think about, like, what is great about technology and how can we, leverage technology to create these fantastical worlds. I mean, look at our backgrounds.
Yes.
It's fun, and the opportunities are endless. And it gets us back to what I think are sort of the core, pieces of humanity that, we won't be able to replicate using AI, for example, which is really that ability to create something from nothing. I mean, you're an incredible artist. And by the way, we need to give you a shout out too with your music. And I don't know if you've dropped your new recordings yet on SoundCloud, but I hope everybody goes and gives it a listen. But it's really about just creating, and being true to whatever your art form is. And not everyone has a particular artistic bent, but we can all write, we can all imagine, we can all do things that are creative, even if it's on the back of something else that we're sort of starting with. Mm-hmm. So I think that's also a pretty interesting opportunity for this next evolution of technology.
With science fiction and futurism, I know you love storytelling. Is there a particular science fiction novel or movie that inspired you to get into the tech space?
No, I think I always loved all the kind of iconic, books and stories. And of course, I look at Ready Player One and Snow Crash, those are had very much kind of shaped our vision of what the metaverse, might be. I kind of grew up watching like Star Trek. And the one thing that was interesting to me about Star Trek was this whole notion of like teleportation. I thought that was insanely cool.
Yeah.
But what I've kind of discovered, and it seems so obvious, but it's almost like we are not really taking the time to build our own future in our minds. I do a lot of workshops with, C-suite executives, and they usually come in kind of pouting because they don't necessarily want to be there. Someone told them they had to be there. And, the prompts don't seem very like business-like, but it's really about getting them out of their normal dynamic of thinking and trying to build like their almost fantasy future. Like, some of the prompts are, 25 years from now, what would you like your perfect future to be? Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, as adults, it is incredibly hard for people to come up with something that's not kind of a pat answer. And finally, once everybody loosens up, we kind of realize that actually we are driven very much by the media we've seen. So it's not a coincidence that, that AR looks like Minority Report, and that this dystopian vision of the future like looks and feels like The Matrix. Because, we've all seen it. We don't have any better ideas that we've concocted to replace that vision. So then we're all kind of we're like lemmings. We're just on that path. But the exercise of, everybody, again, it sort of leads back to the Protopian vision, like for all of us to, what do we want? Like, what do we want our future to look like? What do we want our future to look like for us, for our families, for our kids, for our loved ones, for things, people we care about? And why aren't we building towards that future? And I find it a very curious thing that we're almost passengers. And as we get older, we become less and less able to fantasize and want specific outcomes. And maybe it's because we've just become so logical.
Interesting. No, I love that answer. And it's almost like, when you're a child, you have that unlimited imagination. As you get older, it's like logic sets in, which is a good thing. But I think like the ingredient is using both sides of the brain hemispheres. And I believe technology itself can help stimulate those brain hemispheres for creativity. I saw a really interesting diagram of a brain the other day, and they compared someone learning just the traditional method versus someone, I think, using augmented reality, and the pink and red regions of the brain were, I don't know, lit up more, obviously showing more stimulation with using augmented reality. So that's really exciting. It's interesting. And then it kind of extends to artificial intelligence. And I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on how AI won't make humans redundant, but how can AI serve as like, a symbiotic partner with humans to encourage creativity, that build mindset?
Yeah, I think that, again, it's up to more of us to get engaged with technology. There's a dangerous element to AI that we don't quite understand how it trains itself, and opaque AI is particularly dangerous in that realm. And there's a danger of, unconscious bias being hard coded into AI. But, the more people who become I'm not suggesting that everyone become a coder, but educate yourself so you understand what the opportunity is. And again, if we look at technology as, our aids and, to help actually augment our lives in a positive way, then I think we can come up with very creative ways. It's like you look at AI, and a lot of the activities we're doing during the day are kind of rote. And, I would argue we're already cyborgs. I mean, we're already attached to our, devices all day. It'll just be a different way for us to, experience that information. So, as, AR and mixed reality and the AR cloud and this kind of Web 3.0 and data's living all around us, it'll start to be, kind of just in front of us, sort of free floating. But, I do think that we are headed towards a version of the singularity where we are merged with machines to some degree. I know this is terrifying for some people, but we also forget that we're a generation who didn't grow up that way. And then even your generation as digital natives, it may still be a little bit hard to imagine merging with machines, although I think you've done a beautiful job today merging with the machine. But then I think the generation behind Gen Z will really be then that next generation where it's going to be perfectly normal to be moving in and out of these digital spaces. And so if it makes sense to have a chip implanted or have contact lenses that give you kind of special vision into this, fourth dimension or whatever it might be, I think they'll be very willing to give it a try. Frankly, I'm willing to. I'm like ready to sign up for the chip right now. Like plug me in. I want to be able to speak all languages.
I love that. It's so interesting because we're seeing like Neuralink and brain to computer interfaces, and as Elon Musk would arguably say, we're like cyborgs now. It's just not biologically connected. Like we have our phones, and that's the extension. It's interesting. I attended virtually a transhumanism conference the other week, and it was just really interesting just to listen to the talks and about where the future is going. And I have to admit, it is scary, but it's exciting at the same time. So it brings up all these emotions. But I think people will like enjoy, how it can augment their lives in a positive way. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on like, I guess, privacy and the other potential ethical considerations that like is obviously the elephant in the room right now of all the shit.
Yeah, I think, this is why self-sovereign identity is so incredibly important. And, it is going to be a bit of an effort on our parts. Like we are going to have to want to build in that mechanism. So even if someone presents us with a really simple interface, we're going to have to actually leverage it and use it and put in the parameters of what our comfort level is in terms of sharing data. And that's going to take some education. And I think, older generations, it may be a challenge at that level but I think that, it's again, if you don't care what happens to your data, then that's okay. But I think that there is a really interesting opportunity, not just with self-sovereign identity, but in a completely different value construct where, we decide what has value. If you think about, self-sovereign identity, we're all going to have to engage, and we're going to, even if someone presents us with the simplest toolkit, we are going to have to go in and kind of set those parameters of what our own comfort level is relative to sharing of data. And, we have given a lot of data to big tech over the years, and it is very much time for us as consumers to demand to have control back, but then we do have to manage it and control it. It's really, really critical.
Yeah, I mean, and with new challenges come new opportunities. So I can only imagine all the new jobs that would open up for these sorts of things, privacy, self-sovereign
exactly.
Yeah, in the metaverse. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate it. I guess my last question for today is what advice would you have for people that are interested in learning more or being in the tech space?
We're so lucky because we have such a great community, and XR is still a relatively small community. Actually, I was just looking at the list of people who are coming to Augmented World Expo in a little less than a month now. And I remember when I first started going about 8 years ago, actually 9 years ago now, and it was so small. It was like in one room, and there were like 10 little like AR exhibits, and and how it's grown, and yet still it's a pretty small industry. And so I would urge you to reach out to people. Sammy, you and I met. I actually think I saw somebody tweeted a quote of yours about sentient AI. And so I went to your Twitter feed and I saw that you just written something really cool. So I reached out to you and said, I love how you're thinking about this. This is amazing. And that's just how we got connected.
Yes.
And, I think that and I try and respond, like people reach out to me on LinkedIn. If they're reaching out to me, not to sell me, offshore development services, but they're a student or they're someone who, wants to break in, I really make an effort to answer and set up calls and do what I can to help. And what's interesting is people will find that a lot of the, kind of thought leaders in the space and those, people who you've heard of over the years are the same, and they're really willing to help. And, we want more cool people in the industry. So come on in, there's plenty of room for everybody.
I love that. That's so uplifting and empowering and very inspiring. So very much appreciated, Amy. And thank you for being on board the Holoship.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed chatting with you.